It's December 25th, 2007, and the McDougalls are sat around the table at Jim and Cath's house for family Christmas. The day they'd eat too much, drink too much, and play cricket. The atmosphere is heavy this year.
She rang every year, and when mobile phones weren't such a thing, she knew where we were every year for Christmas.
Chantelle's sister Colleen, their mum and dad and brother are all trying to have a nice Christmas.
My brother's, such a joker. He's going, if Chantelle doesn't ring by 1 p.m. or 12, whatever it was, then she's out of the will.
It's been 5 months since any of them have heard from Chantelle. Last time Colleen spoke to her was when she'd answered the phone before handing it to Cath. The call where Chantelle had said she was going to Brazil with her partner, Simon Cadwell, as they knew him then, and their daughter, Leela. Ever since Chantelle left home at 17 years old, wherever she was living in the world, on Christmas Day, she would always call home.
We'd pass the phone around and everybody would talk to her.
This year, her mum, Cath, was just holding it together, waiting. As the time ticked by, the room was tense. Would it ring?
And of course, there was no phone call that Christmas.
Chantelle's absence was an invisible presence in the room. Everyone could feel it.
I was quite shattered. I got through lunch, but then I retreated because no phone call.
The silence that Christmas was loud. It was filled with questions. Questions that Colleen, Chantelle's sister, couldn't help staring in the face.
What's the problem this year? Brazil has phones too. What was stopping her from contacting us? Its suspicions started to arise.
I'm Dominique Bayens, and this is the final episode of Expanse, the Nannup 4, Northcliffe. By 2009, 2 years on with no sign of the four, the disappearance is with the Missing Persons Unit in Western Australia.
Police have made inquiries nationally and abroad and even followed up reports the group may have joined a religious sect.
Police had searched the Blue House, but they didn't do a full forensic examination because too much time had passed. They also missed opportunities to check CCTV footage after a possible sighting of the four.
Anyone with information about the four is asked to contact the Missing Persons Unit.
But where the Nannup 4 went after they left the Blue House remained a mystery. Jim and Cath were beside themselves, but had nowhere to turn. On one of their visits to Chantelle in Nannup, Gary had a conversation with Jim about the Glasshouse Mountains in the Queensland hinterland. It's another place that attracts alternative people living in off-grid communities. Jim thought Gary seemed interested in moving there. So in July that year, they hooked the caravan up to their four-wheel drive and headed north to Queensland, armed with stacks of posters with Chantelle and Leela's face on them.
I feel like you've got to try something. I put them up just about everywhere I went. We even had them stuck on the side of the cars.
It's one of those things you don't want to give up hope.
Jim and Cath spent 3 months driving from Victoria to Queensland, putting those posters up in every town along the way. It's crushing to think how desperate they must have been that they travelled thousands of kilometres because of a one-off conversation they'd had 4 years before.
Nothing ever became of them.
But it was worth a try. Desperation, I guess.
And time kept marching on. 2 more years passed, and in 2011, Jim and Cath were headed off on another trip. This time their path would take them back to Western Australia. So they reached out to WA Police again.
And I rang them up and said, we'll be in WA in a couple of months.
The police officer tells them to come in when they're passing through.
We went up the second floor or somewhere, and we went in this room and this whole wardrobe was there, and she said, that's all your files in that wardrobe's full of your stuff, what we've done.
Jim and Cath have a chance to ask questions, find out what happened to some of Chantelle's things.
And they said, the best avenue now is for me to instigate a coronial inquest. So I said, well, how do I do that? He said, just write a letter to the coroner.
4 years with still no hint of Chantelle and Leela, and Jim and Cath have no answers and one final hope for getting some. In October 2011, they wrote to the Western Australian coroner requesting an inquest into Chantelle and Leela's disappearance. A chance for everything that had come to light to be systematically reviewed, looked at again with fresh eyes. The case was handed to another team, and an investigation called Omega started. It re-examined all the previous information, tried to follow things up that had been missed. A search was conducted of their property and surrounds. A police dive squad searched 5 dams on the property. In September 2016, Omega's final report was handed over to the state coroner to decide if an inquest would go ahead. Jim and Cath were still waiting. Then they got their glimpse of hope.
And the coroner accepted my letter and we instigated an inquest at Busselton.
Over 3 days in December 2017, a decade on from the disappearance, Coroner Barry King presided as everything they'd found was laid out. The family made the trip from Victoria to Busselton, that same coastal city Chantelle would take Leela for homeschool group in 2007.
Just going over and over it, it's very difficult, but I want to find out what happened or where they are, and so I'll just keep doing it till I find something.
The McDougall family, surrounded by a crowd of media, huddled into Busselton's small courthouse to finally hear the answers they were looking for. The atmosphere was tense. One by one, witnesses were called forward.
There was just so many things. I took notes all day on things we didn't know.
Medical records from before they disappeared showed that Chantelle, Tony and Gary had obtained strong sedatives and anti-anxiety medication, and that Gary was also prescribed antipsychotics and an opioid, which can be fatal when combined with other nervous system depressants, as in sedatives. The inquest heard about Gary's unsettling emails in the months before the disappearance.
He had told someone online that he was planning a family suicide pact, but later changed his mind and said they'd move to an isolated area instead where they can't be reached.
And his unusual beliefs, which even the coroner had trouble understanding, calling them bizarre. The inquest laid out the police investigations, which had found that 8 days after the Nannup 4 disappeared, a young Canadian man called Alexander Fominov killed himself. He was one of Gary, alias Simon's, followers and had visited him in Nannup with his friend Kirk. A bit over a year later, Kirk and his girlfriend, Christina Parrott, also took their own lives. According to police, suicide notes left by the 2 backpackers didn't indicate they were unhappy or depressed, but that by dying, they were moving on to a higher plane, which sounds uncomfortably familiar. Police had tried to track any final movements of the Nannup 4, but while there were some possible sightings and travel movements in the days around their disappearance, nothing conclusive. Certainly nothing that could point to where they'd gone or what happened.
Police investigator Gregory Balfour told the inquest there were several reported sightings of the family that weren't followed up.
Around the days of the disappearance, there were some sightings of Tony Popic in Perth, where his mobile was also pinged. Someone, presumed to be Tony or Simon, travelled to either Northcliffe in the southwest or Kalgoorlie to the northeast. The bus and train tickets had been booked under a false name, using phones connected to the 4. The name used was Roberts, the same name as the road they lived on. That same week, Tony's brother was delivered a package. It was details for Tony's bank account and superannuation policy, and a note apologising for being a crap brother. And then there were all those things they sold. The money just sitting in their bank accounts, like they'd been saving for something, but then nothing. The last person to see Chantelle went to the Blue House to buy the last of her pet dogs. They noticed that nothing appeared to have been packed up. When they asked Chantelle whether Leela would like to say goodbye, Chantelle said Leela was unwell and seemed like she was trying to hurry them out. Chantelle went into a room and when she came back, seemed more anxious and said she might need to take her daughter to hospital. The sum of all these investigations was ultimately not enough for the coroner to make a definitive finding.
The coroner said while the group's spiritual beliefs pointed towards suicide, he found it hard to believe a self-styled cult leader wouldn't make his death a highly publicised message to followers.
He delivered a 53-page report, and at the end of it, said he could not find beyond reasonable doubt that any of the Nannup Four were dead or alive. It was a massive blow for the family, who thought this would finally bring them the answers they were looking for.
I've read it over and over and over, but so it is what it is, basically. We will never finalise the stuff, you know. We just hope she turns up, you know.
Peter Greaves, the copper who helped the McDougalls when Chantelle first went missing, has retired now, but he hasn't given up investigating. In fact, he's been working with Chantelle's uncle, Barry McIntosh, another retired copper, trying to uncover anything new. And they've got a theory. They think they might know where Chantelle and Leela are. See, one of those strange things in the lead up to the disappearance was that bus ticket under the name J. Roberts to a town called Northcliffe, an hour and 15 minutes drive south of Nannup. Much like Nannup, it's surrounded by ancient forests and attracts people who want to live away from society.
You go through like the big kauri forests with massive big trees, just very isolated.
In October 2007, a few months after the Nannup Four's disappearance, there was a group of inmates from a nearby prison tasked with clearing the tracks in a section of bushland near Northcliffe.
And the work party came back after for lunch and then they packed up and left and informed the prison officer they'd found discarded clothing.
The prison officer thought this was so significant, he actually recorded it in his diary. And there was something else that one prisoner noticed.
One of the prisoners amongst the crew said there was a very distinct smell of death.
That prison officer took the conversation seriously enough that he raised it with the local police station so the officers on duty could take a look. They did. And when they went there later on that month, they found a T-shirt that looked like it had been there for years, but they couldn't smell a thing. There's no record that police searched the bush or did forensic testing on that T-shirt. In fact, the whereabouts of that T-shirt is now unknown. When the investigation for the inquiry visited in 2015, bushfires had swept through the area, burning everything in the vicinity to a crisp. So they found nothing either. And Chantelle's uncle Barry reckons they'd also been in the wrong spot. The inquiry confirmed they couldn't track down the prison workers to verify the details. But Peter Greaves and Barry McIntosh couldn't shake the feeling Northcliffe was important.
When Popic's movements are traced back after the family have disappeared, the last time he is actually seen is catching a bus to Northcliffe, and he gets off the bus there, and that's the last time anybody's had any trace of them whatsoever.
They also believe the four visited the area twice for family picnics.
Gary Felton, Simon Cadwell, had an affinity with this specific place outside of Northcliffe because it had some sort of intrinsic value around his belief systems. He felt that that was a place where you communed with the stars and their alternate universe.
If they disappeared in July and the prisoners were in that area in October and smelt that smell of death, does that line up? Would they have smelt that? Yeah.
Yeah. That's why it became a fairly high priority to have a look in that area and see if that was going to lead anywhere.
So the pair of retired Victorian police officers started fundraising, and Peter sank in a bunch of his own cash too. They think they've finally got the means to answer the question that's haunted Jim and Cath McDougall for 17 years. In July 2024, Peter and Barry board a flight from Victoria, headed west to carry out their own search. They have 1 week to find something that has eluded everyone else for the better part of 2 decades.
I was so hoping that we would be able to come to a resolution to give Jimmy and Cath some closure. I can see with the way they live their lives that it still has a very big impact on them all of the time.
They arrived in Northcliffe on a cold, wet winter's day and head straight out, about 20 kilometres past Northcliffe into the forest. The forest is too thick to drive to, so they pull on their gear and head out on foot. It's not long before their boots and clothes are heavy with mud.
It's so thick that in places you couldn't push through it, so you actually had to get down on your hands and knees and push the bush apart to be able to get through, like tunnel through underneath it. And then probably every maybe 15, 20 metres you might find a little clear patch that might be 2 or 3 metres round where you could actually stand up and have a look around to work out where you were going to go to next.
Before they arrived, they hired a drone operator with a fancy bit of kit which could identify disturbances in the ground, areas where a body could be buried. They're using the drone map and information they have about where those prisoners were working to create a search area.
The first day we went out, we did the usual, take the boots off and wade through the river and then put everything back on again. But by the time we'd got back, we were soaked. So we just didn't bother from then on. We just walked straight through with everything on.
Every night, they returned to their accommodation, freezing cold and drenched to the skin.
It was inhospitable, to say the best. We'd have to hang all our clothes in front of the wood fire and try and dry everything out because we were soaked.
They spend days looking for disturbances picked up by the drone mapping, but all they find are sections of old mountain bike tracks or fallen trees. Then, on day 5, they brought in a team of cadaver dogs.
Dogs that search for bodies. They can pick up a scent under the ground that may have been there for years.
The search team gathered together in a clearing near a large flat rock.
We described the terrain to them. We described what sort of things that they needed to be in mind of and how we were going to get across the river, obviously with the dogs and all of the gear and everything else, with instructions that if anybody found anything they were to call out, bring it to attention, not touch anything, treat it as a crime scene.
The group methodically worked through thousands of square metres of bushland, stopping every 80 metres to reconvene.
We also had metal detectors as well, so we were looking at potentially if there was any burials there that we'd be able to pick up things like shoes, belt buckles.
The search was uphill, and in the first 2 runs, the dogs didn't pick up anything. But then...
The last run we did up the hill, 2 dogs indicated a particular area of interest, and they kept coming back to that specific area.
So they pull up and start digging. They dig for half an hour, running the metal detector over the area, but they can't find anything.
We were very disappointed, very disappointed. We really, truly believed that we were on to something.
Time and money's up. Peter and Barry had flown thousands of kilometres across the country to find answers for the McDougalls. And after a week of pushing through vindictive scrub, the pair of retired police officers had no choice but to pack up and board their flight home.
I remember getting on the plane to come home and thinking that I felt very deflated by it, and also thinking, like, what else could we have done? What other scenario could we have run?
But there's something they didn't know when those cadaver dogs picked up that scent.
The area where the dogs were indicating, there was an edge of an erosion channel there, which had water that was groundwater coming from higher on the hill and seeping down over that. Sometimes that scenario can happen where the dogs might be 100 metres from where the burial might be, but they're picking up the scent of the smells coming through the water table under the ground and coming out onto the surface again.
So that scent the dogs picked up might have been carried under the ground on a watercourse and given them a false read about 100 metres from the actual site. Once they worked this out, Peter and Barry mapped back to where it could have come from. And the pinpoint lines up with some other intel they have. Peter believes they might have the location of a final resting place. They haven't been able to get back to Western Australia since. But in 2024, Barry McIntosh wrote to the WA Police Commissioner, requesting a controlled burn to get rid of the almost impenetrable bush, to allow a thorough search of the area. For almost a year, they heard nothing back about a search. But then once we started asking questions of the police, a reply came through. It said police are reviewing the information and doing some more inquiries, and another search is proposed. Then in early 2026, after we made further inquiries, police said they won't be doing another search after all. It's another disappointment for the McDougalls, who continue to wait, hoping that one day they'll get the answers they desperately want. One of the questions I've been pondering constantly since I met Jim and Cath is how they carry on. I'm realising the answer is because they have no other choice.
Well, sometimes I think it's very hard to get up and keep going, but I always think of the other grandchildren and children, and that I think is what keeps me going.
You've got two choices, be strong or be weak.
Yeah.
You've got to be strong, you've got to keep going.
Jim's still going on his four-wheel driving trips and tinkering with his vintage cars. And Cath is still sewing and planning trips to Melbourne with her girlfriends. All I can think is, how did something so extraordinary happen to two of the most ordinary people? Two people who wanted the most regular things out of life. To have a family, provide for them, go on a few adventures, have some hobbies. For almost 20 years, they've been thrust into a roller coaster ride with no end in sight.
It's just not knowing the emptiness, really, that just kills you.
Well, it depends what day it is. One day I'll be hopeful, next day I'm convinced that they've been killed or something. It's been so long, and I just can't believe that Chantelle wouldn't have tried to get in touch with me.
This kind of loss is isolating.
My friends will say, I just don't know what to say to you. I said that there's not much you can say, really. That's probably the hardest. People probably don't understand what it's like.
As our time together is drawing to a close, Cath tells me a story.
I remember a couple of weeks after they'd disappeared, I had this dream, and it is so vivid I can still see it as clear today. And it was Chantelle walking towards me saying, "Don't worry, Mum, I'll be all right." But who knows, because you don't find out anything. Just keep hoping. And I keep thinking about that lovely smiling face walking towards me. So.
Tony, come over here, you've got to see yourself in the camera. And Simon can go behind if Lee stays still.
It would be a lie to say I understand Chantelle completely and how she got to where she did.
Yeah. We're going to do in their hands.
But what I feel I can say with some confidence is the headlines that have told her story got it wrong. This story can't be condensed into the headline of a bizarre death cult. Yes, there are parts of this story which do leave me thinking that Gary Felton was operating like a cult leader, but it was also a complex path of unequal power dynamics, of a teenager meeting a much older man, bound together by the birth of a child, isolated from family and friends. I remember something cult expert Raphael Aron told me.
I think it's really important to understand that we're all vulnerable. Vulnerabilities cult leaders prey on generally are an awareness of the need for people to belong. There was somebody who once said that the need to belong is so great that it matters not what you belong to rather than you belong.
It's easy to see Chantelle as a victim, but there were parts of her that were strong. The way she loved her daughter, the way she contributed in her community, how she pushed back against Gary and maintained some form of relationship with her parents and friends. It's easy to fall into the trap of asking questions like, why didn't she leave? How could she put her daughter in that situation? But I keep thinking how it's only recently we've begun to understand the concept of a coercive relationship, how a person can be strong, but also not leave. Chantelle may have truly believed she was moving to Brazil, excited about the prospect of a new life in this off-grid community with her young daughter. There's also the painful idea that Chantelle believed Simon's teachings, that by taking your own life, you would move on to a higher plane. Chantelle's family and the people I've spoken to are adamant she would never hurt Leela. But I wonder if Chantelle didn't see it as hurting Leela, that they were simply transcending this world. No matter what the answer is, the fact remains that 5-year-old Leela didn't get a say in any of it.
I hope I can see you next time. See ya.
Then there's Tony, a man who led a normal life until he didn't. A polite, gentle and hard-working person who was also a bit lost, who met a man who claimed to have the answers. And then we're left with Simon Cadwell, a self-proclaimed prophet who turned out to be just a guy named Gary Felton from the outskirts of London in England. When I hear his old friends talk about him, I think about how we aren't just one thing. Gary Felton could have been a good mate, but he could also be so controlling of the women in his life. He was an atheist who began taking LSD, which maybe altered his mind with disastrous consequences. I met a long-time local in Nannup who remembered Leela and told me she always imagined that maybe they did get to Brazil and Leela would turn up again one day as an adult on her own terms.
You are taking movie.
I understand why people want to think that way. The alternative is too sad and painful.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Mostly I think about the people left behind, who I'm sure go over those same stories, looking for ways they could have changed things, the choices they did or didn't make that led them here. There's homeschooling mum Diane Abbott, who wonders how no one saw this coming. Chantelle's school friend, Donna Cameron, who would love to go back in time to that busy street in Melbourne, take Chantelle's hand and whisk her away. Auntie Pauline Taylor's deep regret about the simple act of putting an ad on a notice board. And Jim and Cath McDougall, who desperately wish they had asked more questions. We can never know where the choices we make will lead us. Most of us are just trying to do the next right thing.